It wasn't that long ago that anti Semitism existed mainly on the fringes of American society. That, unfortunately, has changed, and dramatically. Today, Moment is on the front lines of helping people understand anti Semitism in all its complexity through its in depth reporting and analysis. Moment's Anti Semitism Monitor tracks incidents throughout the world. A special Moment Live series brings together experts to talk about anti Semitism and strategies for fighting it. One of these experts is the outstanding woman who's receiving Moment's 2022 Ruth Bader Ginsburg Human Rights Award, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt. Ambassador Lipstadt has spent all her professional life fighting anti Semitism and Holocaust denial, and she's now the U.S. State Department's special envoy to monitor and combat anti Semitism. Recently, I had an opportunity to sit down with the ambassador and talk about her work. The full interview will be available later. Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, welcome and congratulations on being this year's recipient of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Human Rights Award.
Thank you very much, Robert. It's a pleasure being here, and it's a pleasure receiving this award from Moment Magazine, which I have read since its inception. I remember when Leonard Fine and Elie Wiesel were founding the magazine when I was way back in graduate school, and I have read it uninterruptedly. And in recent years, I also want to say, given my new position here at the State Department, how much I admire the way Moment has handled the analysis and the fight against anti-Semitism, charting a very, very solid course, not hysterical, not underwriting, but just hitting the right notes. So congratulations to the team and hats off to the team that's responsible for that.
Well, your mission at the State Department, and I quote now, is to monitor and combat anti-Semitism and to advance, and here I'm quoting, U.S. foreign policy to counter anti-Semitism throughout the world. So where do we stand? Is anti-Semitism dangerously on the rise, and what can the U.S. do about it?
Well, I think it is on the rise. It's on the rise in different forms. It's on the rise certainly in physical attacks on Jews, some of which don't grab headlines because they are only, and I put only in big quotation marks, knocking someone's hat off if they're ostensibly wearing a black suit, white shirt, Borsalino or some other kind of hat, fedora, and tzitzit hanging out. Or it's harassing a woman who's pushing a baby carriage in Brooklyn or in Antwerp or in some Paris or in someplace else. We have those kind of things, and then we have more serious incidents as well. I think it's on the rise. I do know that I think people are more conscious of it and possibly reporting it more, so I take that into consideration. But the increases of numbers are so dramatic that even if you qualify for hypersensitivity, more sensitivity. By hyper, I don't mean critical at all. But people's more sensitivity to this thing, it's still on the rise.
Why do you think that is? How do you understand the cause of that?
I think it's a multiplicity of reasons. It's never just one reason. In some way, we're in a perfect storm. We have supremacists, white supremacists, separatists, militia groups who feed on anti-Semitism, who nurture their followers on anti-Semitism. And they are becoming more emboldened, not just in this country, but in other countries as well. And the irony is sometimes they demonize the Jew, but then proclaim their great support for Israel. They sort of make that weird separation. And that's one factor. I think we also see other places on the political spectrum where it's coming, maybe not with, certainly not with the same violence and vituperativeness, but in a very effective way in terms of their objective as well. I think we also, the other thing that we can't ignore, and we've been so conscious of it the past few months and the past few weeks, is there's a delivery system now that didn't exist years ago. When I first started working on Holocaust denial issues, if you wanted to get material about Holocaust denial, proclaiming Holocaust denial, etc., you had to often get it sent in a plain envelope to a PO box. because it was illegal to go across international lines. The different countries would stop it. Now all you have to do is go to Mrs. Google
Right.
or Mr. Twitter or whomever it might be and put in something. And not only can you put it up, but you have an
Yes.
audience, you have a megaphone. And that certainly
Which
is
raises a
helping
question
the anti.
that it goes beyond how much uh, journalistic attention is being paid to anti-Semitic events. Social media. I mean, to what extent is the rise of social media uh, giving public space, big audiences to ideas that have always been there, but have been on the sidelines before?
You know, I don't want to beat up on social media. Social media is like a knife. I describe it as like a knife. A knife in the hands of a surgeon can save your life. A knife in the hands of a murderer can take your life. It's how it's used. It's how they monitor themselves. It's how they live up to the standards that they have proclaimed um, for monitoring the what is said on their sites. So social media is a big part of the problem, but it's also a big part of the way in which we communicate and further aspects of Jewish life. At the same time, let me focus maybe uncharacteristically when we're talking about anti-Semitism with some of the positive. I mentioned going to the Gulf, to Saudi Arabia, to UAE, and my deputy has been to Bahrain, and I hope to be there soon as well. No one would have dreamt, and I'm going to Morocco next week. No one would have dreamt that the Abraham Accords would bring the results that they're bringing. I'm not talking so much about the relationship with Israel. That's the remit, that's the responsibility of other people working not very far from where I'm sitting right now in the State Department. But in terms of their willingness to address issues of anti Semitism, to recognize, and of course, Saudi Arabia is not yet part of the Abraham Accords, one hopes that eventually they will be, but to recognize that uh, attitudes towards Jews and the geopolitical, very important, very severe geopolitical situation in the Middle East for Israel and the Palestinians are two separate, can be seen and should be treated as two separate issues. I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. I know you love good anecdotes. I'm sitting in Saudi Arabia with an older sheikh who's been put on my list to visit. And I don't think he had gotten the message that the kingdom was sort of looking at Jews and the history of Jews in a different light. And he said to me, Ambassador Lipstadt, if Israel solved the Palestinian crisis, there'd be no anti-Semitism. So I put, while listening to my mortar board, my cap and gown went back on. I'm thinking as an academic, seems to me there was anti-Semitism before there was an Israel-Palestinian problem. Seems to me there was anti-Semitism before there was an Israel, before there was Zionism, millennia. But I didn't want to get into that kind of match with him in terms of history. So instead, I said, after a bit of a pause, I said, in my country, there was a surge, a absolute skyrocketing of contempt for hatred of Muslims after 9/11. So much so that in New York City, the polyglot capital of the United States, the city, I believe it was the city council, forbade permission for the building of a Muslim community center and mosque adjacent to Ground Zero. You may well remember this incident. I'm sure you do. And I said, many people I know, including many Jews, thought that was the wrong decision. Why should a Muslim who wants to go and worship, wants to go and pray, or wants to take her family for different events and celebrations at a community center be prevented from doing so because other Muslims had attacked the World Trade Center? He said, you're absolutely right. There is no change. That's a no connection. That's a political issue, and this is a hostility towards a group that religiously identifies. So I paused for a dramatic moment, and then I said, well, that's the same thing with anti-Semitism. Irrespective of how you feel about the Israel-Palestinian issue crisis, that doesn't give you license to go around hating Jews or fomenting hatred of Jews. And of course, Saudi Arabia was for many decades, I don't think it's not the case right now any longer, one of the exporters of imams who would go to Europe and other places and preach anti-Semitism. So they listened to me. I met with fairly high-ranking ministerial officials. I met with one deputy foreign minister who, when I entered his office, put out his hand and said, "I come from a city of Jews." Medina, and I said Medina, and he said correct. So does that mean everything is solved? No, of course not. Does that mean there aren't human rights problems in Saudi Arabia? No, of course not. There are human rights problems in our country too. But does that mean there's an opening of line of communication? I think there is, and that's something that is affirming.
One other question. You've been awarded Moment's Ruth Bader Ginsburg Human Rights Award, and I wonder, did you ever know or meet Justice Ginsburg?
I never met her. I actually we were once honored at a UJA Lion of Judah event, and I sat next to her, but I didn't really know her. But I do have Ruth Bader Ginsburg socks, which I wear periodically. But she was, when you look at her story and you hear her deep-seated commitment to equality, to fairness, it comes out of such Jewish roots. And when she once talked, I think she was on medication, so she fell asleep during the State of the Union address. And afterwards, she said her granddaughter called her and said, "Bubby, you can't do that." And my heart melted.
Well, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, once again, congratulations on your being named this year's recipient of Moment Magazine's Ruth Bader Ginsburg Human Rights Award. And thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you. I love our conversations. And even if you don't give me another award, I'm always willing to be in conversation with you, Robert. Thank you very much.
Deborah, we are so delighted to honor you this evening with Moment's 2022 Ruth Bader Ginsburg Human Rights Award. Your long and deep expertise in Holocaust history, your tireless fight against Holocaust denial, and your passion for combating anti-Semitism everywhere make you a perfect recipient for this award. I have been privileged to call you my friend for many years, and as chair of Moment's advisory board, it is especially meaningful to join you here this evening. Thank you for your lifetime of advocacy on behalf of human rights, and congratulations on this well-deserved honor.
What a great pleasure it is to recognize Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt as a 2022 Moment honoree. Ambassador Lipstadt has worn many hats during a storied career: scholar, educator, author, activist, and now the U.S. State Department's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. In each of these roles, she has upheld historical truth, courageously fought the haters and deniers, and strived to ensure that the world never forgets the memory of the victims of the Holocaust. We are all, U.S. citizens and world Jewry, supremely fortunate that in a time of growing and frightening Jew hatred, we have an individual of Ambassador Lipstadt's knowledge, conviction, personal integrity, and courage to lead the fight against worldwide anti-Semitism. Congratulations, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt.